Kids are cute. I want to go to that kid's Thanksgiving. I'm just going to say, because he started out saying like turkey and gravy and chicken, and he ended up with like chili dogs and burritos. That is an awesome Thanksgiving meal. Can you tell it's November? Like I can. The weather's starting to cool down, and stores are crazy busy. Has anyone been to like Walmart or Best Buy or anything like that? The stores are insanely busy. You can tell it's almost Thanksgiving because Walmart has their Valentine's Day candy out. And if you look on Facebook, you will find people who are much more creative or have much more time on their hands than I do that are doing this thing where every single day they're posting a new thing that they are thankful for. And they're using the hashtag thankful or 30 days of Thanksgiving. It's basically the online version of what we just saw those kids do, or of that awkward time at Thanksgiving when you're all sitting around the table or the living room and you make everyone go around the room and say what they're thankful for. Have you ever had to do that? It always was terrible to be the last person or towards the end of the line when all the good stuff was already taken. Like you weren't allowed to say, well, I'm thankful for my family anymore. We spend Thanksgiving with Zach and Keely and their family. They've kind of adopted our family, and KD had us do that one year, and I was towards the end, and I was like, I don't know, I'm thankful for this plate that I'm going to eat if you let us stop playing this dumb game. But yeah, you can tell it's Thanksgiving time, it's the holiday time, and it's hard to express that. That's why you won't find me doing the 30 days of Thanksgiving, because what happens is, much like that game that we play at Thanksgiving, you'll see people who are doing this thing online, and at first they're really going strong. Like day number 1, they're thankful for their wife, and number 2 is their son, number 3 is their dog, and like by day number 20, they have either given up, they're repeating themselves, or they are thankful for the most random, ridiculous stuff. Because it's hard to do that. You know, it's very difficult to come up with things, even though we have so much to be thankful for. It's hard when you're put on the spot to come up with what those things are. It reminds me of a show that I like to watch, and we were watching clips of it yesterday, is Family Feud. Have you ever seen the really dumb answers that people come up with on Family Feud because they're put on the spot and they have to try to think of something that's so easy, but they're under pressure? Well, that's what it's like when you're playing that game, or when you've committed yourself in front of the world to do 30 days of Thanksgiving. So I'm not going to do that, but I do want to take some time before we go any further today to tell you about something I am thankful for, and something that I feel like we should all be thankful for, and that is our freedom. I am so thankful for our freedom, and I'm thankful for every single man and woman who has served in our armed forces so that we can have the freedoms that we do have in this country. It means so much to me. I had the opportunity with Christina. We got to visit this week with a good friend of ours who is 96 years old and is a World War II veteran. And as we sat in his living room this week, tears came to his eyes as he told us, he said, Brian, they don't understand what it was like over there. And tears welled up in his eyes, and he said that to this day, 96 years old, he still has nightmares about what happened when he served our country in war. And so we often forget about what it is like, but yesterday obviously was Veterans Day, and I do think it's great that we take a day out of the year to remind everyone to be thankful, but I think that we should do so much more, especially as Christians. You know, if you're at a restaurant in July, I don't care when it is, and you see someone wearing a hat or a jacket or whatever that signifies them as a veteran, jump in front of them in line and buy their lunch. Tell them thank you for your service. But today, I don't want to embarrass anyone, but I do want to take a moment and say, if we have any active or retired military or veterans, please, if you would, stand for just a moment and let us honor and recognize you. Guys, seriously, thank you so much for your service. It means the world. Please turn in your Bibles to Romans chapter 5. Try to figure out where I'm at here. While you won't find me posting 30 days of Thanksgiving with the hashtag thankful, I do think it is important for us as a church to pause our lives and think about what we have to be thankful for. If you look through the Bible, so many times in the Old Testament, scriptures will begin with the words, give thanks. God reminds us time and time again to give thanks. And so it's important for us to do that. And so what I thought we would do is take the next few weeks here in November and have our own little series called hashtag thankful. We won't go online, but we'll do it here. And if you want to go online and share something that the Lord shows you through this series, then I encourage you to do that and use hashtag thankful and tag CenterPoint Church. But that's what we're going to do for the next few weeks, is talk about what we are thankful for. And this week, we are thankful for our suffering. Somebody just looked at their neighbor and like, what did he just say? Like I think I misunderstood him, because I'm pretty sure he just said suffering. And as crazy as it sounds, you heard me right. This week, we are thankful for our suffering. Let's look at Romans chapter 5, beginning in verse 1. Paul says, now that we have God's approval by faith, we have peace with God because of what our Lord Jesus Christ has done. Through Christ, we can approach God and stand in his favor. So we brag because of our confidence that we will receive glory from God. But that's not all. We also brag when we are suffering. Have you ever been reading something and the way that the author wrote it, you kind of had to pause and back up and try to figure out what they were meaning by what they said because of the order they put the words in? Like I've had that happen before. I'm like, wait, what does he mean? And you read it and then you get the context and you understand it. I think that when the church at Rome read this for the first time, that's probably the feeling they had. They were like, wait a minute, what? I don't understand. What did he just say? Like, we brag because of our suffering. We brag when we are suffering. Have you ever been to an old-fashioned testimony service in church? Yeah, we used to do those. We don't anymore. And there's a reason that we don't. Because what would happen is, I'll explain what a testimony service was. It was designed to probably, somebody read the scripture and thought, man, that would be a good idea to get up and tell about what all the Lord is doing good for you. And it was very uplifting from time to time. Somebody would get up and share a testimony and talk about what the Lord was doing for them, and encouraged you and built your faith and brought you together as a community. It was a great thing. But with the good comes the bad. And I think that there were people that got a hold of this passage where it says we brag about our suffering, and they really took it literally. Like they would get up and literally brag about how badly they were suffering. And it became a contest to see who could suffer more. Sister Sarah would get up and she would talk about her dog and how he was down on his back and how she couldn't get him, to come and eat, so she had to feed him by hand. But the Lord's keeping me through it all. And then somebody else would get up and say, well, you think that's bad? Here's what's going bad in my life. And then they would say everything that was going bad in their life, and then at the end they would say, but the Lord is keeping me through it all. They would brag in their suffering. But that's not what Paul is telling the church to do. You see, another translation of the word brag that Paul uses there is rejoice. Paul's telling the church, rejoice in your suffering. Be glad in your suffering. Brag in your suffering. Paul says we're not just going to suffer, we're going to be happy about it. But see, what some people in those testimony services didn't realize is that Paul goes on to say why we brag about our suffering and why we can rejoice in our suffering. So let's continue in verse 3. He says, we also brag when we are suffering. We know that suffering creates endurance, endurance creates character, and character creates confidence. Now, before we go any further, I want to let you all know that this sermon is not for just anybody. It's for a very specific group of people. This sermon is only for people who have problems. Like if you're one of those people who your life is perfect and you have no reason for stress and no reason for worry and you never have any problems, this sermon is not for you. But I have a feeling that maybe there are one or two of us here who have some problems from time to time. I'm talking about people who struggle with sickness or financial worries. People who get into arguments with your family. I'm talking about people whose lives have been affected by drug abuse or alcoholism or poverty or depression or divorce or disease. This sermon today is for people who have problems. Is there anyone in the house that suffers from time to time? All right, so there's a couple of people here who need to hear this word. Those of you who this is for you, get out your pens or borrow one from somebody else because we're getting ready to find out why and how we can be thankful, yes, Lord, for our suffering. There's three things, and Paul lays them out very clearly in Scripture. You don't even really need me to explain them to you, but since we're all here anyways and I have a microphone, I will. Number one, Paul says suffering creates endurance. Isn't that the truth? Suffering creates endurance. Have you ever noticed that when life throws garbage at you, you kind of have two choices? You can either give up or you can keep going. You can give up or you can keep going. And I've noticed that when you keep going, things actually start to get easier. Some of you know that I work at UPS in the mornings. I go in about 5 o'clock in the morning, sometimes earlier, and I'll load trucks. And I'll load trucks till about 9:30 in the morning, go home, get a shower, and then I'll come into the church. One of the things I learned when I started that job is that they work you really, really hard at UPS. Like they give you more work than any one person can handle. It's some suffering. The struggle is real at UPS. And I was walking out one day, and everybody gets off at the same time, so we were walking out, and somebody looked at me and said, "Hey, how are you doing?" And I said something that I say a lot. I said, "Oh, I'm just living the dream." And they said, "Dream?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they said, "Man, it seems more like a nightmare." And I said, "Yeah, but at least you know that at 9:30 you get to wake up." And I said, "I can do anything for 4.5 hours. Like literally, I don't care how bad it is. I can do just about anything for 4.5 hours, knowing that pretty soon it's going to change." But as I've worked there longer and longer, I've gotten to the point where the work is still way too much to handle. There's still stuff stacked all over the floor and it's still dangerous and crazy and hectic. But I don't really let it bother me anymore because the suffering has created endurance. A German philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, is attributed with a quote that has since been repeated by great scholars such as Roseanne Barr and Kelly Clarkson. He said, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger." What doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And while that's not really true in the most literal sense, there are things that I could do to you that would not kill you, but they would obviously make you weaker. There's still a lot of truth in that saying, and that's kind of what Paul is saying here. Or what he's trying to communicate is what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Suffering builds endurance, which allows you to suffer even more. And you might as well get used to it because life has troubles. Somebody look at your neighbor and say, "Life has troubles." I think Jerry Seinfeld said it best. He was being interviewed and he was talking about how when he was younger that they would heckle him and stuff. He even told this one story about how he was doing comedy at a discotheque and they literally just stayed out on the dance floor dancing the whole time he was doing his routine. Like the poor guy, they gave him no respect whatsoever. And he was talking about that, and he turned to it, and he said, I don't mind suffering. He said, you suffer in all things, work, relationships, whatever else you do. Unless you're eating ice cream, you're suffering. Jerry gets me. But the more that you suffer, the more you are able to deal with what life throws at you. The better you get at it, because you begin to realize that, hey, I've been here before. Or, you know what, this is bad, but it's been a lot worse. Do you remember when, I can't tell you how many times that Christina and I have had that discussion, usually over finances. We'd be talking like we don't know how we're going to pay the rent or mortgage or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, this is bad, but do you remember when it was really bad? Like, we would kill to be in this position back then. And as we take baby steps through life, we're learning how to deal with new, bigger struggles as we go on. It begins to change us and make us better because suffering brings endurance. And in Paul's words, number 2, endurance creates character. Endurance creates character. Does anybody other than me want to be a man or woman of character? I mean, that's one of the things that I want more than anything. I want to be known as a man of character. Paul says that endurance comes from suffering, and endurance creates character. In other words, the more that we suffer as Christians, the better we become. Now, I want to be clear here that Paul is not writing to just anyone. Paul is writing specifically to the church. He's writing to the church at Rome. And he's telling the church at Rome, the Christians at Rome, the followers of Christ at Rome, that when you suffer, it brings endurance, and endurance builds character. Because we all know there are people who suffer and they don't become people of character. Right? Like you've met some people who have suffered so much in life that they are just miserable to be around. But Paul's working under the assumption here that he is talking to Christ followers. And that we are not just going to suffer, we are going to suffer well or suffer correctly. Because we have something that the world doesn't have. As Christians, we have or should have the fruit of the Spirit, which is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So he's assuming that in our suffering, we are exhibiting these characteristics. And guys, I'll tell you, when you are able to suffer in love and in peace and in patience and in kindness and in goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, then you become a man or woman of character. When you suffer with the fruit of the Spirit, it creates character. You know who this makes me think of? Cinderella. Cinderella knew how to suffer really well. She lived with 3 of the nastiest hags. I think I'm allowed to say hag. She lived with, Gene, am I allowed to say hag? Thank you. I'll take that as a yes. She lived with 3 of the nastiest hags that anybody had ever known, and spent all her time cooking for them and cleaning for them and sewing for them, and still walked around all the time whistling and talking to squirrels, birds, and mice. Now I know what you're all thinking. She's fake, right? Like nobody could be that. She's a character. Of course nobody could be like that. So I have another example for you. How about me? So Christina and I have this ironing board at home. Most people do. It's nothing special. Ours is kind of special. This ironing board is kind of old, like really old. And when I'm ironing my shirts, generally 2 to 3 times in a given shirt, it will just drop to the ground. I'll just be ironing along, ironing my shirt, and it will just drop straight to the ground. Bend over and I pick it back up and start over again. 2 to 3 times every shirt. It's been that way for a while now. A lot of you are thinking, why don't you go buy a new ironing board, dummy? You don't know me. I was raised really, really poor. Right, Joanna?
Preach.
Yes. I was raised really poor. So we don't throw things away unless they literally need to be thrown away. Here's an example. Yesterday, Christina and I had the pleasure of going and getting a new television. We got a new TV yesterday. That's how I went to Best Buy and found out that the stores are crazy busy. We bought that television to replace one that we bought 9 years ago to the month. Like the other one I got 9 years ago on the day before Thanksgiving so that I could watch the Razorbacks play on Friday. Lord help us. Because our other one was dead. But this TV that we replaced yesterday, for some time now, has had a problem. When we turned it on, it would cycle through crazy-looking screens with loud noises for a few minutes before it would get to a state where we could actually use it. And it started where it would do that for a minute or two, which was no big deal. And then it would do it for 5 minutes, which, was kind of frustrating. And then 10 minutes. Literally last week when Courtney was home, we decided to kick off the holiday season by watching Elf. We all came together in the living room. We turned on the television. 45 minutes later, we were able to start that movie. So I said, hey, Christina, how about our Christmas present this year to each other be a television to replace that thing? So we don't throw things away. That's why I tell you that story. So the other day I'm ironing my shirt. Back to the ironing board. I'm ironing my shirt. And for the second time in that ironing session, the ironing board drops to the ground. And I just, I just keep whistling and I pick it back up, set it in, I go on ironing. And Christina said, you know what? You're a good man. And I was like, what? And she said, you don't even get mad. She said, do you know how many people would have thrown that thing out in the yard and mangled it into pieces by now? And I was like, well, I never really thought about it that way before. And that's little, it's silly. But to me, that was huge because I want to be a man of character. I want to be someone who has self-control even when the stupid ironing board won't stay up. I want to be like Nick Vujicic. Does anybody know who that is? Nick Vujicic. He's an Australian man. He's going to turn 35 years old next month. And he was born with something called tetraamelia syndrome. Tetraamelia syndrome, in its simplest explanation, is a disease that's exhibited by having no arms or legs. Nick has no arms or legs. He has one little leg type thing. But he calls it his chicken wing because it looks kind of like a chicken wing, and it's down here where his leg would be. And that's all that he has. Like, he has every right to be angry and frustrated and disgusted with life. But he's not. Nick is one of 7 people worldwide known to be suffering from this condition. And he is suffering really, really well. Because Nick is a world-renowned Christian speaker and author. His first book, I love this title. His first book was entitled Life Without Limits, Inspiration of a Ridiculously Good Life. And what Nick does is he goes into these schools and he'll have them, they'll set up a table, you know, and they'll set them on this table, and he'll talk to these kids in schools all over the world about how your circumstances don't have to choose your outcome. And he'll talk to them about how life can be good even when you don't have any arms or legs. And then he'll bring them back that night when he can talk about Jesus, and he'll tell them that the reason he's able to suffer well is because he has the fruit of the Spirit in his life, because one day he decided to give his life to Christ. Nick is suffering well. Now, I love Nick's work. I've followed him for quite some time. I've shown some of his videos in youth services and different things. But it was pretty cool when I was preparing for this morning, and I actually went out to Twitter and I searched #thankful just to see, you know, if I could find some of the funny things or whatever that people were saying they were thankful for. But we're not to that point yet. It's only the 12th or whatever. We'll get there on the 20th. But this is the first thing that popped up, and it was a quote from Nick, and he said, "Many people think I can't live a normal life because I don't have arms or legs. I could choose to believe that and give up trying. I could stay home and wait for others to take care of me. Instead, I choose to believe that I can do anything, and I always try to do things my own way. I choose to be happy. I am happy because I am always thankful." Nick is living proof of what Paul wrote to the church at Rome. That suffering builds endurance, and endurance creates character. That when you're a Christian and you have the fruit of the Spirit at work in your life, you can suffer well, and it can create a person of character. But Paul doesn't stop there, although that would probably be good enough. Paul goes on to say, number 3, character creates confidence. Character creates confidence. Now, those of you who know me know that I'm a nerd. So this is where I'm going to kind of get nerdy on you, okay? Because this word confidence doesn't mean that when you have character, you think that you can do everything well. It doesn't mean that you're a confident person, you feel like you're good at stuff. Actually, the Greek word that is translated there as confidence is the word elpis. Everybody say elpis. It means to look forward to something, usually with pleasure. The best way that I should be able to describe this is in talking about heaven, but the best way that I can describe it is in talking about Disney World. Have you ever been to Disney World? We went one year the same time as Jared and Dina. You remember that? I just remember that. I had forgotten all about it. We had dinner the first night we were there. Christina and I have been to Disney World with our family twice. And it is truly the happiest place on earth. Like, you feel like you're in a magical world. Everybody treats you so amazingly, and the colors are brighter and the smells are better. Like it's this wonderful place. And I remember the second time we were going, because we'd been there before and we knew what it was like, we knew what to look forward to. Building up to that trip was so exciting. Like, we just couldn't wait. I mean, it was like work even seemed okay. Like, we go to work every day and be like, man, this is terrible, but I'm going to Disney World in 6 months. And then 5 months, and then 4 months, and then went into a huge depression when we came home. That's what elpis is. Looking forward to something with pleasure. Other translations of this passage call it hope. You see, what Paul is saying here is that as Christians, we are going to suffer. It's going to happen. We are going to have bad times. Guys, it's just life. It is what it is. You're going to get fired. You're going to get in fights with your boss or with your husband or your wife. Somebody's going to run into your car. Your kids aren't going to come home when they're supposed to. You're going to suffer. But he says that suffering will build endurance, and that as our endurance grows, and as the fruit of the Spirit is active in our lives, it will create character. And the word that is used there for character means proof. See, Paul says that character will prove that you've got the Spirit at work in your life. It's pretty cool. Like the fact that we can take everything that life throws at us and everything that Satan throws at us in stride and still have a smile on our face and still say, no matter what happens, God is good. That in and of itself is proof that we are children of God. And Paul says that proof becomes your hope. That because you're a child of God, someday you don't have to deal with life's sufferings anymore. Someday you get to go home to be with Him. That's what we call, as Christians, the blessed hope. It's what Paul later says, always be ready to give people an answer when they ask about your hope. So see, the way that God set it up was that we would have the Spirit of Christ at work in our life, and we would suffer right alongside everybody else who suffers. But instead of being like people who don't have the Spirit at work in our life and they look like Oscar the Grouch, we're supposed to have the fruit of the Spirit in our life, and we're supposed to look like Cinderella. And when people ask, man, how is it possible that you just lost your job, but you're still happy? How is it possible that you're going through a divorce, but you're still happy? How is it possible that you just lost your car or you're going to lose your home, but you're still happy? And he says, always be prepared with an answer for your hope. Because that's when you say, you know what? I can be happy because I know Jesus Christ. I can be happy because He's at work in my life. And I can be happy because I know that all this stuff that's going on someday isn't going to be that big of a deal. Because when we respond correctly to our suffering, we show true Christian character. And it'll make people ask. And sometimes I think it's good for us to even think, man, I'm going through a lot. How is it possible that I'm still happy? Why are we thankful for our suffering? Because it reminds us that we have a future.